I take over because we're switching every habit. I do one habit and then Carl does a habit. And we're switching our screens from time to time, so that shouldn't be a problem in Teams. So
maybe you do the PowerPoint, Wim?
Yeah, I need to do. Yeah, I need to have control. That's why I can't only meeting organization presenters can share. I'm not able to share.
Let me make you presenter.
And Carl also.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I have a few announcements. Let me
just take your time.
And then
okay, now I can share my screen. Okay, I can do it. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I'm able to do it. Can you do it, Carl? It's okay for you too.
You can try.
I can click the button. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, great. Yeah, I think maybe let me quickly just go through my. Is everybody able to see my slides?
Yep.
Hey everyone, thank you for joining today. We are Microsoft Azure Singapore community, and we are part of a Microsoft technical group. There are a lot of other communities. There is a ML community, .NET community, and other. So if you are interested in any one of them, you can join our Facebook group, MS Technical Community SG, and all our community session will be announced there, and all other lot of MEPs and experts. So if you have any query, you can ask there. And we have all our upcoming meetups and past meetups are available on meetup.com. So any updates for our upcoming sessions will be available on meetup.com as usual. And all these sessions are recorded. So if you are interested to see our previous recordings, we have done in past year, we have done DevOps series, and we have done IoT series, we have done API building series. So if you are interested to know from any topic from scratch, I think you can go to our YouTube channel, MVP YouTube channel. So, and if you are interested to organize or present in any one of our session, so you can contact to any one of the organizers here. We will help you to connect with the speakers or maybe the one organizers, any other group as well. And these are the sessions we have done in our past. I've done was FinOps on Microsoft Azure. It was for if you want to save the cost on Microsoft Azure, so how you can do the cost management. And I think Martin have explained very well. So this session is recorded and available on our YouTube channel. You can go and take a look. And same as this, we have done for the Kubernetes and GitHub, and yeah. And today's we have two very interesting sessions. One is 7 habits every Azure admin must have. It's presented by Wim and Karel. Both are very well-known speaker and Microsoft MVP. And the second session will be on Azure ML and Kubernetes service model deployment. So it's more on how you will build the model on Microsoft Azure and deploy on Kubernetes using Kubernetes service on Azure. And by Ambrish. Ambrish is a NASA citizen scientist, and he's working in TCS, India. So this is the first session, which is going to start at 7 p.m. in a couple of minutes. About Wim, he is a Microsoft MVP and MCT. He is having more than 15 years experience. And he's working as an Azure technical advisor at Proximus in Belgium. And Karel, he's also a Microsoft MVP and MCT, and he's a cloud solution architect at TextMatch, Belgium. And both are well-known speaker, and they have their own user groups in Belgium, and they organize very nice sessions. And they're having a good experience in Microsoft technologies and hybrid technologies and data migration platforms. And our next session will be 8 p.m. Singapore time. It's on Azure ML. So by Ambrish, he is TCS data analytics and practice lead. He's also worked on several NASA related open source project on ML. And in our upcoming session on 19th of August, there will be session by Nilesh Kule. He is one of the organizer, and he will speak on how to monitor Kubernetes cluster using open source tools and Grafana. Nilesh is the Microsoft MVP and Big Data Cloud Architect at Prudential, Singapore. And related to today's session, we have done a couple of sessions in past. These session recordings are available on our YouTube channel. So we had done with some sort of session with Azure Active Directory with John Seville, and there are other sessions also related to Kubernetes and GitHub. I think we have done a couple of them. And there's also, if you're interested in Microsoft Dynamics 365 or Power Platform, so there is an event happening on 11th of August. Is Microsoft Dynamics 365 community, which is a part of Microsoft Technical Community. So the session is already announced on our meetupgroup.com. So you can just go and attend. And there is another session happening on our data community. So it's in one of them I'm speaking also on building a serverless app using Cosmos DB and Azure functions. And if you are interested in troubleshooting with SQL Server environments, I think that will be another session by Javier, so you can attend. And this is our YouTube channel, so all our session recordings are available there. You can, if you like any other session, you can subscribe and like the sessions. And we have done also some Chartbuster sessions, so you can go and see there. Before hand over to Wim and Karel, there are a few reminders. Please keep yourself on mute. And if you have any questions, you can use raise hand feature or put the in chat box. This session is being recorded. If you like the session, please spread the words on social media. Yeah. So over to you, Wim.
Yeah, let me take control first. Let me see if I can share my screen. So it should be showing. Let me share the slide deck. Over here, should be all okay. So hello everyone, and thanks for joining and welcome. In our session, Carl and myself are going to talk about 7 habits every Azure admin must have. And we hope that you will learn some tips, tricks, and things you should keep in mind with this new job role. Before we go through the agenda, we first of all want to thank the organizers and everyone involved for setting up this meetup and for allowing us to deliver this talk. On the agenda this evening, first we will briefly talk about the responsibilities that the new Azure or Cloud Administrator role entails. New IT role you now see a lot within companies. Then we will talk about the 7 habits every one of those Azure admins, in our opinion, should have. And between those habits, we also show some short demos. And at the end of the session, we will go through some key takeaways to really focus on the things we think you should remember about our session. And of course, completely at the end, if we still have some time, we have a Q&A where we would love to answer all of your questions. So let's go ahead. And let us shortly introduce ourselves. Well, my name is Wim Karel. Like I already said, I live in Belgium, where I work as an Azure technical advisor at a company called Proximus. As a Microsoft certified trainer, I also deliver all kinds of Azure workshops and trainings. Community-wise, I'm a founding board member of a Belgium user group called MC2MC, which stands for Microsoft Cloud and Client Management Community. And we mainly focus on Azure and Microsoft 365, but we also keep an eye on security, Hyper-V, and even the complete Windows Server landscape. Next to that, I also have my own blog, https://wmatthijssen.com. And I'm also a Microsoft MVP, which still is a huge honor. And I'm also on Twitter and LinkedIn. So if you ever want to reach out, ask a question, Azure related then, or just want to say hi, you can always contact me through my Twitter handle @wmatthijssen or LinkedIn. Or to make it simple, you can just scan the QR code at the bottom of the slide. Carl, I think you can introduce yourself.
Yeah, thanks, Wim. So thanks for having us. My name is Karel de Winter. I'm a cloud solution architect working at Dexmag. So we are a company that is focusing on all things automation in Azure. I'm indeed a member of the Tech9 user group. So that's a different user group in Belgium that is also focusing on Azure content, but also on IT Pro content. I'm a Microsoft certified trainer and recently been nominated to Azure MVP. And if you want to reach out to me, the best way is to do so on Twitter or LinkedIn, and you can visit my blog if you will.
Okay, so like most people, Carl and myself took their first steps in IT, working as a support engineer or a system engineer, or as a system administrator for a company who owns their own on-premises data center and infrastructure. And probably there are a lot of people in the session who still do this. And as such an on-prem sysadmin, you were probably responsible, or still are, for almost everything in that data center. You not only need to keep all servers up to date and do all the new server and application installations, but for example, you also need to do all the cabling and racking of the servers and troubleshoot almost every IT possible problem in the company. Hopefully not in the same way like Tom Cruise is doing on the slides, although it would bring an extra fun dimension to her job, I would suppose. But in this modern hybrid cloud world, where cloud in any form is becoming important for almost every business and company, we see this so-called sysadmin role more and more transforming in something else. It will kind of evolve into a cloud or hybrid cloud admin role, or in case of Azure, an Azure Administrator role. For a lot of people, we still hear this mostly sounds a little bit scary because they think they're going to lose their job or they believe their role is going to be less important. But in fact, as usual, how more things change, the more they stay the same. So in their changed role, they still will be responsible for building, managing, protecting, automating, and optimizing this new hybrid cloud environment, just like they were used to when they only worked on premises. Because, like you can see on the slide, the cloud doesn't run itself. Depending in which cloud service model you will run your workloads, is it IaaS, PaaS, SaaS, or even these days CaaS and FaaS. I think I now have mentioned them all. There will always be a shared responsibility where Microsoft will manage everything until a certain point, but you as an Azure admin also will have some responsibility. This can be managing your IaaS VMs by foreseeing them from Windows updates, antivirus, or backup, or only managing the databases and the data when you run Azure SQL or MySQL databases. So just keep in mind, it's still a shared responsibility. And I think, Carl, after this intro, we can now go ahead with our first habit, I think.
Yeah. So the first habit is something you should click the slides, Wim, because I can't take control. So
okay, no problem.
So the first one is the Azure Toolkit. So if you want to manage and protect your Azure environment, what tools do you have and what tools do you need? So here I can show you how you can remain in control of your Azure environment. And if you are working with Azure, then you should have some kind of toolkit, like we say, to manage Azure. And let me tell you a story here. So I once built some test environment with a lot of networking resources, like an Azure firewall with the premium SKU and VPN gateways and so on. So those costs a lot of money. And on a specific day, even at night, it was, I think, I woke up and I realized I didn't delete those resources after testing. And then, you know, the panic hits loose, and then you can't sleep anymore. But I fixed that problem. So let me tell you how I fixed that and which tools I used. So one that you all know is the Azure portal. So you go to portal.azure.com. And there you can manage your Azure environment, but that you know that you also can install an app. So you have the portal app you can install on your PC, and that looks and feels completely the same as when you're working within the Azure portal. And next one is if you are only working with Azure Active Directory, but you don't want to see any other resources, you can access the Azure Active Directory Admin Center, which is a specific portal for only managing Azure AD. And if you want to test out new preview features, you can use the preview portal. But a quick tip from us here: if you want to test out preview features, don't do it in production because you don't get support from Microsoft. And for me, the most important one is the mobile app. And with that, I could manage my resources from my phone, even at night. So you just have to install the app. You just log into your environment, your tenant, and then you can shut down or delete your resources, and maybe it will save you some time, like it did for me. So on the next slide, we see that, like Rambo also uses these tools. You can use the Azure Cloud Shell, which is a completely bash-powered shell that you can run your Azure commands, your Azure CLI, but also a lot of different commands. You have the Azure Storage Explorer, and you can use AZ Copy, which helps you to copy large files to your storage account or your Azure environment in total. And then you have the Windows Admin Center, which is now in preview within the Azure portal. But with Windows Admin Center, you have that complete overview of your environment, your hybrid environment. So you can manage your on-premises servers and then enable, for example, backup or site recovery via the Windows Admin Center, and then you can manage that on a specific server, if you will. One of my favorite tools is Visual Studio Code. If you want to write some PowerShell scripts, Azure CLI scripts, or ARM templates, definitely use Visual Studio Code and install all the extensions. It will help you a lot by creating those files and doing some automation. And last is the Windows Terminal, which is available in the Microsoft Store. So you can install that and you can have PowerShell, Azure CLI, but also the Cloud Shell within one Windows Terminal, if you will. And on the next slide, these are some tips from our side and from the community. So the tools that the community has created, for example, the Azure Charge, but also the Azure Latency Test we use a lot. The tenant availability check is the o365.rocks. That's the site that you will, or you can use if you want to check if your tenant name is available or not. If you are using if you are creating a new tenant, and the Azure Governance Visualizer is something that you it's very cool to see that you have the policies, but also the management group subscriptions and policies that are attached to that. You can have in one governance reporting tools. And then you have the ARM template best practice analyzer, also a very useful tool from the community. And yeah, the list goes on. I think on the one that I use a lot is the Azure Mask. So you can, within your browser, have your subscriptions grayed out. So if you are presenting something, it doesn't show up. The Azure deprecation notices will show you which service is not used anymore. And you have msportals.io with the complete list of all the Microsoft portals, not only Azure, but also Microsoft 365, Office 365, and all the mail exchange related things also. And the next thing is something that we use a lot. That's Azure Lighthouse. So if you want to use all those tools, but you have multiple subscriptions or multiple tenants, for that you can use Azure Lighthouse, and it brings the capabilities of managing those multiple subscriptions across multiple tenants within one class of pane. So it's actually based on delegating access to other users. So Azure Lighthouse helps you to manage other environments, whether you are an MSP or even a large enterprise that manages multiple customer environments or multiple internal environments. You also can use Azure Lighthouse to manage all those different environments. So I think the next thing is I wanted to show you
maybe stop sharing. I will stop sharing, Carl.
Yeah.
Maybe you can take control then. Let me try this one. Okay, can you try it?
Yeah, I'm sharing my screen now.
That's fine. You need to stop sharing and then switch it, and then it works.
Yeah. Okay. So what you see now is the Cloud Shell, like I told you. So you just go to shell.azure.com, and then you have this integrated shell, which you can choose PowerShell or Bash, and then you have your own environment. You also can check if you wanted if you will write some PowerShell scripts. You see that you always have the latest version. If you want to have the Azure CLI, you will see that there is also the latest version that is installed. So you always have the latest version. That's the thing here. And the thing that you also get is a cloud drive. So that means that you can share the drive that is accessible via the shell, and you can put files on. So for example, if you go to the cloud drive, you will see that I have a simple JSON file or text file, whatever, and you can even open it with some code editor. So that's a very smooth Visual Studio Code editor here, where you can edit the files and then save it or open another file. So it's very handy to just put files here. You can also upload files if you will. Just click on this button and then you can upload files which are going to be stored in your cloud drive, and your cloud drive is just a mount point that is sitting on a file share, so a storage account with a file share enabled, and that's that comes in very handy. Let me just clear the screen, and if you want to run some PowerShell commands, you see that you can just type in PowerShell, and like I said, you can access the Cloud Shell even from Windows Terminal, if you will. Okay, Wim.
Maybe something nice to mention, Carl, is if you now Carl is doing it directly from inside the Azure portal, but if you want to have it in full screen, you just can go to shell.azure.com and then you can open it in a separated tab, and then the screen is bigger to type all your commands. That's also maybe a nice trick. Let me take control again and share my screen. It's showing, Carl, I think.
Yes.
Okay. Let me go. So for our second habit, we want to talk about how you can remain future-proof, but by trying to think beyond IaaS, because where we're going, we don't need VMs. Okay. When moving on-premises resources to Azure, the first thing you need to think about in the assessment phase is choosing the right cloud migration approach to really make your cloud journey a success. You not only need to check if your business is ready to move to the cloud, to Azure, but you also need to validate your IT people's skill set to see if they have the right skills to support such an environment. And if they don't, you should work out an Azure learning path for them. In your cloud migration approach, the 5 R's can help you to see how an on-premise workload application can or should be migrated to Azure. First of all, you have rehost or lift and shift, where you simply pick up an on-premise service, is it physical or a VM, and you just place it in Azure. It's not always that simple, but yeah, I think you get the picture. Then you also have the option to refactor or re-architect, where you're going to rethink your workload before moving it to Azure to make it more high available, for example, or scalable. You can also revise or re-platform your workload, where you look into migrating this on-premises workload to an Azure PaaS service, or you can even completely rebuild or rewrite your application, or even replace it with a SaaS application. What Carl and I see a lot is that depending on who initiates the move, is it IT or is it the business, there mostly will be different types of one of the 5 R's being used. When IT initiates or when it's a timeline-driven migration, we see mostly lift and shift being used as a first step and as the entry point into the use of Azure, because for most people and IT administrators, it feels and seems familiar. The thought behind this, if we can run a VM on premises, we probably will be able to run it in Azure. But when the trigger comes from the business itself, we see more being chosen refactor, re-architect, or rebuilding migration scenarios. Luckily, there are also some resources from Microsoft that can help you choosing the right cloud migration approach. First of all, you have the Microsoft Cloud Adoption Framework, or CAF, a collection of documentation that provides you with implementation best practices and tools. If you're architecting any new cloud workloads or thinking of newly Azure use cases, then the Architect Center is also a good resource you can use. Here you can find all kind of implementation examples, which can guide you in making a good high-level and low-level design. Of course, you can also use Azure Migrate, which is an Azure service, which Carl and myself use a lot during Azure migrations at customer environments. And if you're not sure how to get started with your cloud migration, you can always check out Azure Migration Program. Here you can find the right help by asking for guidance, or you can contact any migration partner that can assist you in your cloud journey. A thing we also want to mention is that there is also a Microsoft Learn course available, which you can follow. It can help you in getting familiar with the Azure Enterprise Scale Landing Zone architecture and all the critical design areas related to it. So go check that one out. Next to those, in our opinion, it's always a good idea when you make your design that you start thinking beyond IaaS VMs and try to use a more cloud optimized strategy. Yeah, you can, for example, look into container instances, AKS, or app service, instead of just deploying or lift and shift VMs. The flow chart shown on the slide, which can also be found on the Architect Center, can help you selecting the right compute service for your workload. So yeah, go check out that one also. And also an important thing to mention is that when your first approach was lift and shift, so you start with migrating some VMs to the cloud, then in our opinion, you should always try not to make it the end state of your migration. For example, you can switch from an Azure IaaS file server to Azure Files later on, or from an IaaS domain controller to Azure Domain Services, if it's technically possible, of course. Or for replacing your IaaS DNS server, you can look into Azure DNS or Azure DNS private zones. And even for people still working with print servers on-prem, you can now start migrating to universal print and replacing them by that. So, Carl, I think you can take control again.
No, I can't take control, but you just have to click.
I stopped presenting, so it should work now, I think.
Yeah, but it's just the next slide, I think. The Azure Governance, topic 3.
Yeah, okay, I will click then. If I'm still sharing? No, I'm not sharing anymore.
No.
Okay, there you go.
Yeah. Thanks. So in the next topic, we are going to make sure that we remain in control of our Azure environment, and that's by using the Azure Governance. So based on a few questions that we received from customers, we can demonstrate why the governance and also the management is needed. We had questions like, how are we going to make sure we know who created what resources and when, and how do we know that which department is responsible for certain Azure services and so on. So you can see here on this slide that there are several things that we need to take into account when we are creating, but also managing and also securing a total Azure environment. And when proper Azure governance model is followed, you can ensure that your team is not only operating in a secure, but also in a compliant environment. So you know exactly what is going to be created, or what can be created and what not. And one of the biggest challenges in a cloud environment is cost management, and Wim will tell you all about it. But we need to make sure that we are suddenly not facing a very high bill because someone has created a very expensive Azure VM or another resource in Azure. So we also need to be aware that that there can be a lot of opportunities to, for example, store data in Azure, and the data can be stored in very different regions that are distributed worldwide. And if a specific company does not allow it for, let's say, legal reasons, then to store it outside of the country, you can also have that in your governance model. So here on this slide, we see the what. So what does Azure Governance actually consist of? Well, we need to organize and structure our environment via a well-architected framework, and that framework consists in different pillars. So you need security, but you need also compliance, you need cost management, and so on. You need to standardize your resources. You need to control your access, who can access the Azure environment, and that you can do via RBAC, and RBAC means role-based access control. So you are in control what and by whom and where something can happen in Azure. We also use a lot of tags. So you have that transparency of your Azure resources, and tags are adding metadata to those resources, which give you a logical format. For example, we always use tags like owner, department, and environment, for example. And like I said, cost management also gives us an insight into the consumption of the entire cloud environment. And we can enforce policies, so we can use Azure policies and enforce those policies to which allows us to control the properties, for example, of our resources and what can be created and what not, for example. And last but not least, we can query but also explore our Azure resources with Azure Resource Graph. And that's a very fast and very efficient service that we can use to request all the resources in our Azure environment with certain filters on. So we can do, for example, an assessment of our Azure environment, and we can also measure specific things like which policies are being applied, how many VMs do we have, and here you see different query examples. For example, what VMs are we using with a specific type of OS, which VMs are in a specific location, what VMs do have a specific size, what are the SKUs of those VMs, and so on. But in fact, let me just quickly show you a little demo of Azure Resource Graph. So if things go, should see my Azure portal.
Yep.
And
okay.
Here I have created three queries. So first of all, you need to search for Azure Resource Graph Explorer, and there you can type in based on the Custo query language. So that's a specific language that you can use to query the resource graph logs. Here we have a simple query that locates all my VMs and then summarize it by location. So I know that I have 4 VMs in West Europe and 2 VMs in East US 2. Then you can query all your resources and then sort them by name. Very convenient if you want to have a list of all your resources. And something that we use a lot, very simple query, but this one will show you all the different resource types that you have. And this is something important if you want to migrate from one subscription to another. For example, if you have a current CSP type subscription and you want to migrate that to the new MCA type of subscription, then you need to know which types of resources you have, because some types are not allowed to just migrate to another subscription or move to another subscription. And this is something very handy. You just run that query. It's very fast. And then you get all the different resource types. So you know, for example, that the Kubernetes service or something else will be difficult to migrate. So then you can plan that ahead and discuss that and see how you can move those resources. So that was a short demo, Wim, to show the resource graph.
Let me take control again. My screen should be showing, I think.
Yes.
Okay. So habit number 4, Azure Cloud Spend and how to remain informed and in control of your cloud cost. A very important habit in our opinion. Well, it all starts with choosing the right subscription type, which should be an important step in your design process. And this because, like probably some or most of you will know, they all have different rates, offers, and benefits. To once Carl and myself mostly seeing companies or enterprises, and they're now called Microsoft customer agreements, or the other things we see is CSP subscriptions. And when you're using one of those, the prices for your Azure resources will be lower than when you're just using your credit card and a pay-as-you-go subscription. You should also be aware of all other software licenses used in your company or at the customer's location, like those, for example, for SQL. Further know that when you have an AA or MCA agreement, you can set up enterprise dev test subscriptions, where you will get special rates for some services like VMs and SQL databases. Also good to know is that some services are always free to use, some of them with specific limitations. And for example, for testing purposes, you should definitely look into Dev Test Labs and the Azure Marketplace Test Drive, which are ready-to-go environments that allow you to experience a product for free, like a lot of network virtual appliances, which you can use in your Azure environment. And if you're still running a lot of IaaS VMs, you can lower their cost by using reserved instances, where you make a reservation of resources and capacity for either 1 or 3 years. You can also combine this with a hybrid use benefit, which you all use your existing Windows or SQL licenses with software insurance. Keep that one in mind for your Azure VMs or SQL servers running in Azure. And a combination of both can save you up to 82%. And important to know is that that you not only can use reservations for VMs these days, but also for SQL and even Azure Files reserved capacity, or a lot of other Azure resources like you can see on the slide. Next to those, there are also a lot of other ways you can use to keep your costs down in Azure. Best is to always estimate your cost in advance before starting any project or migration. Therefore, you can use the Azure Pricing Calculator and the Total Cost of Ownership, or a TCO calculator, which is a tool to estimate cost savings you can realize by migrating your on-premises workloads to Azure. And always keep an eye on any design decisions which can impact your costs when you make your high or low level design. Think of, for example, resources can cost less when deployed to a different region, which is not always possible, of course. Or when you design to use GRS, it's more expensive than when you choose to use LRS, for example. Next to that, always delete all unused Azure resources, like, for example, things we see a lot staying left behind in an Azure environment is unassociated public IP addresses or unused storage accounts, for example. And when your VMs don't need to run 24/7, try to start and stop them during non-working hours. You can use auto shutdown these days directly from the VMblade if you're using the Azure portal, or you can now use automation tasks, or even the start-stop virtual machine of our solution through Azure Automation. And then, of course, Azure has a built-in free tool named Azure Cost Management, which can help you to monitor and manage your costs across all your clouds, even for AWS, for example. You can use it to do not only cost analysis, but also to define cost alerts to inform you when, for example, your consumption reaches a given threshold. Next to Azure Cost Manager, you can also use Azure Policy, and this to set up specific policies to implement a form of cost control, which can be part of your Azure Governance, and by which you can guardrail your environment. For example, you can set a policy which only allows the deployment of certain VM sizes in your environment, or just simply restricts the creation of public IPs. You can also enforce that specific resource stack, like cost center, are always required when new resources are deployed, or that a resource can only be deployed in a certain region. For example, you only want them in West Europe. You can simply put in a policy in place saying the only allowed region is West Europe, and if someone wants to deploy in East US, he won't be able. Because we're now talking about policies, something we also want to shortly mention is security policies. A security policy defines a set of controls which are recommended for resources within a specified Azure subscription. When that specific security policy is applied, workloads will be compared with that security policy, and any resources that don't meet the requirements of that policy will be listed as non-compliant. To be able to do this, in the back, Azure Policy works together with Azure Security Center, which Karl will tell something more about in the next habit, if I'm correct. And to make everything a little bit easier to get started, Azure Security Center also applies a default policy that is called Azure Security Benchmark these days, and it's version 2, if I'm correct. You can see this benchmark as a part of a set of security guidances that also include the CAFA framework and Microsoft security best practices. And it's designed to provide clarity and security best practices and controls for configuring and operating Azure and Azure services. So if you want to better protect all the resources in your different Azure subscriptions, you should definitely enable it. But let me quickly show this in a demo. Let me go. I think my Azure portal is shown. So if you simply go to Security Center, you can simply type it in the global search bar, for example. Go to Security Center. The first thing you need to do, most of the time this will happen automatically, is you need to enable Azure Defender off or Azure Defender on, but Karl will talk about it. You can simply do it by clicking on a subscription and select one of those and click on Save. And if you then want to enable, so if that's enabled, you choose between Azure Defender off and Azure Defender on. You just go to Security Policy, you click on it. You can see I have a lot of management groups enabled, and some of my subscriptions are following the CAFA framework and the enterprise scale landing zones. So for example, I have my management subscription. You can see the default policy is assigned. So if I click on it, you should see the Azure Security Benchmark is enabled. Because I'm using Azure Defender on for this subscription, I also can use other security policies. If you want to use those specific ones, if you need to follow specific regulations like the ISO ones, then the difference, you should set Azure Defender to on. But if I want to enable the Azure Security Benchmark, I can click on it and I can modify the parameters if my portal is following. You can see there are a lot of recommendations already listed. In our opinion, you should customize those because I think there are a little over the 100 rules in there. So if you don't need specific rules, for example, you can simply disable it. Of course, you can also automate this through ARM templates or whatever to make this more easy to implement. But customize it, enable it for every subscription you have, even for the free ones, because it's free and it can really help you to get started. So if you want to check the compliance, let me close this one. You can simply do it through regularity compliance in Azure Security Center Blade. But like I said, in the back, it's combined with Azure Policy. You also can go to the Azure Policy Blade, open the compliance part, and you can see it's enabled for some of my subscriptions. And if you can click on it, you can see which resources or which setups aren't compliant to the specific regulations, and you can get those fixed. So I would say go check it out, and I think you will have some work probably. So Karl, I think you can go ahead with habit number 5 now.
Yeah, if you want to show the slide deck again,
do I
please.
need to share again? Let me take it.
So the next habit is Azure Service Health, and that's something that is going to show you something that when things are going wrong in Azure, it will show you and it will help you. So you can use Azure Service Health. It's a personalized view of the health of your Azure services, and it's a free Azure service. So it can notify you if issues that are impacting your environment are happening, but also what's the health of the resources that you use. And you have different service health events, like for example, if there is a service issue, a plant maintenance, health advisories, security advisories, those are all different types of events that can happen. And good to know is that the health stay for 90 days, and you can hook the service health with Azure Monitor, so you can send mails or text messages or even webhooks, if you will. Next up is Azure Advisor. It's also a free service, and it will provide you with a personalized recommendations, but also best practices for your different subscriptions and different resources. And those recommendations, those can be customized so that not only recommendations shown from the subscriptions or resources, but you can select specific subscriptions and resources groups that are most important to you. So you can also have the recommendations from different types of resources like VMs, application gateway, your app services, your SQL servers, and so on. And the recommendations can be for costs, but also for security, reliability, operational excellence, and also performance. And those recommendations come from the underlying data that is coming from Azure Monitor. So Azure Monitor is feeding the Azure Advisor, and Azure Advisor is doing the logic behind it. So something new is the Azure Advisor score. Now you can have a score that is calculated on it's 2 slides, the 2 previous slides.
Too fast. Yeah. Too fast.
So it's, you can have the score, and like I said, and Wim showed you already, the score can be from 0 to 100 in each advisor category, and a score of 100% means that all your resources are tracked by advisor and follow the best practices, and 0 means that none of the resources follow those recommended best practices. And indeed, on the next slide, we tell you again, use Azure Advisor because it's free and it will help you showing the best practices of your environment. And one thing to know on the next slide is that you can have service health and advisor alerts. So based on Azure Monitor, you can create alerts, for example, and then you can send mails or create tickets or whatever you want to do. And something, another free service that you can use, or one of the services is a security center. So Azure Security Center is your first thing to do when you need a complete security overview of your Azure environment. And it will also give you recommendations on how specific resources can improve security configurations. And on the next slide, Wim told you and showed you already, Security Center is offered in 2 modes. You have the free mode and you have the standard edition, so to say. And the Security Center without Azure Defender enabled is the free mode. And if you, it will be included in your subscriptions when you first visit Security Center. Then your subscriptions will be visible in the dashboard. And if you click on Azure Defender on, then you have the paid edition. So the paid edition includes the free mode additions, but also protects your workloads, do assessment, gets recommendations against threats, and also provides built-in protection for your hybrid cloud workload. So you can have your on-premises environment protected by Azure Security. I think the next one is the demo slide. So if I share my screen, and I can quickly show you how Service Health is working. So here you can see my dashboard, and you can also pin specific Service Health into your dashboard. You see, or maybe you don't see, the 2 little green dots, but those are the VMs that I have in West Europe and also in East US. But if you go to Service Health, then you will see that you have the different categories. So first of all, you have the service issues that are the issues in the complete Azure environment across all regions. So here we can see that there has been a connectivity issue in different regions. So in West Europe and North Europe, you can see that that there are specific issues. Then you also have the planned maintenance. So if for your subscriptions in a specific region and a specific service has been planned maintenance, then you will see this in service health also. You have the advisories for the health, but also for the security. But at the moment, there are no health advisories. Something that I showed you already is the health history. So the health history is for the complete Azure environment, not only your Azure environment, but all the regions that are in the Microsoft network. And if you want to see specific health of your own resources, you can go to Resource Health. For example, you select a specific subscription and a resource type, for example, VMs, and you will see that I have, if it's loading, that I have 2 different VMs located in that subscription. One is okay, the other one is not okay. So if you click on it, you will see that okay, it's unable to determine the health of the VM, but it will. If something is wrong with the VM, then it will show you that, yeah, for example, the VM has been shut down, or there is a specific event happening on the VM. That will showing all here in the resource health. Let me just quickly try again, but I think the Azure portal is not working. Yeah, no, it's just unable to view. One of those VMs is shut down, so that's why the resource health should give me an error, which is a user initiated error because I've initiated the shutdown. And here you can also create the alerts. So based on Azure Monitor alerts, you can create the health alerts that are making part of a specific action type or action group, and then you can, for example, email specific owners of that group and so on. So that's that was the demo, Wim.
Yeah. So let us get back to habit 6. Click, yeah. Where we want to talk about secure hybrid network connectivity, so you can remain secure when connecting to your Azure environment. As most of you will know, the easiest way, but the least secure one to connect to an Azure VM is through the use of a public IP address, a PIP. In this way, you can connect to the VM through RAP or SSH, depending if the VM is a Windows or Linux VM. You just need to associate a new or an existing PIP to your VM's network interface. And if the subnet where the VM is part of is protected with a network security group, an NSG, which should be best practice-wise, you just need to create an inbound security rule to allow TCP port 3389 to allow RDP, or TCP port 22 to allow SSH to get it working. But you should never, mark our words, use it in any production environment to connect to any of your business critical or production VMs. This because one or both of these management ports will be widely opened on the internet, and in this way, your VM can easily be attacked or breached by hackers or script kiddies. So in production environments, you should always connect to your Azure resources through a hybrid connection with high security, like, for example, a point-to-site VPN, a site-to-site VPN, or an express route. A resource we still see a lot being used in production environment is a jump box or jump host or jump service, like some people like to name it. You can see a jump box as an EA server, a control entry point in your Azure environment, which is used to access and manage all the other VMs in your environment. Mostly it's deployed in a separated security zone, management VNet, for example, or subnet. Of course, if you use the hub-spoke model. So, and if you're using such a jump box in your environment, which mostly has an associated PIP, then it's best to enable just-in-time VM access for it, or JIT, so you can control access and reduce the attack surface to this jump box. JIT is available when you use the Azure Defender on tier of Security Center, so just keep that one in mind. But luckily these days, you can also use Azure Bastion to securely connect to your Azure VMs. Azure Bastion, or like we like to name it, a jump box as a service, is a PaaS service that you provision inside your virtual network, preferably the hub VNet. and it provides secure and seamless RDP SSH connectivity to your virtual machines, and this directly from the Azure portal over SSL. How does it work? Bastion lives in its own subnet. The Azure Bastion subnet in your VNet, which exposes only port 443 or SSL to the internet. Through your Bastion host, you connect with RDP port 3389 or SSH 422 on the private IP address of your VMs. And in this way, the VM itself doesn't need a public IP to connect to it, so it stays secured. The thing we also want to mention is that Microsoft recently announced a new SKU for Azure Bastion called Standard, which is in public preview. The difference between the basic SKU and this one is that it allows you to specify the number of instances up to 50, where the basic SKU only deploys 2 instances, which only supported around 20 to, I think, 24 concurrent sessions. Just to keep in mind that when you use the Azure Bastion standard SKU, the Azure Bastion subnet size should be increased to a subnet size of approximately /26 or larger. And at the moment, you can only change the SKU via the Azure portal, so no Azure PowerShell or Azure CLI or whatever can be used. On this slide, we also put in a link to a blog post and a GitHub repo for an Azure Bastion deployment script written by myself in Azure PowerShell and validated by Karel. The script itself will create the Azure Bastion subnet with an associated NSG, which holds all required inbound and outbound rules. So it will spare you some time to figure those out. It will also create a pip and the Bastion host, and will set a log and metric settings for the Bastion resource. So if you want to make it easy for yourself when using Bastion, go check it out. But let me quickly demo some things.
There was one question, Wim, if it's supported to use Bastion to access VMs in a peered network.
It's possible these days. So these days you only need one Bastion host. Preferably your Azure Bastion subnet is located in your hub VNet. You place your Bastion host in there, and then you have your peered spokes. You have probably a production VNet, dev VNet, for example, and then you can connect from your Bastion host to the VMs running in those spokes if the peering is set up and working like it should. Yeah. So it's you don't need to deploy a Bastion host in every separated VNet you're using. You just place it in one, and you just peer it, and it's okay. And it even works these days between subscriptions, but go check it out. The pricing, but most people also using the standard SKU these days. So then I have more connections, but the thing is mostly a lot of people use it /27 as the address prefix for their subnet. But keep in mind, if you're using that standard SKU, like I said, you should use a /26. So by default, if I deploy a Bastion subnet these days, even if I'm using a basic or a standard SKU, I use a /26. So that's a thing you should keep in mind. But let me quickly show it. So for example, I already have a Bastion host deployed. It's deployed in my management subscription, and it's deployed in my hub VNet. So I have a separated subnet over there. And if you want to configure it these days, you deploy it through the script, then you deploy the basic SKU. But if you want to change to the standard SKU, you just go to your Bastion host, you click on configuration, and over here, you can switch from basic to standard, and you can set the amount of instances you want to use. So it's up to 50 these days. I can't do this at the moment because the Bastion subnet I'm using over here is a /27. So if you try to set it to 50, the deployment and the change will fail in the back. So if it's failing, probably your subnet size isn't big enough. So that's also an easy trick to get to see this. Also enable the diagnostic settings. Let me cancel this one. Okay. So you can set them, a lot of people don't do it. You can set them over here. You can add them to a log analytics workspace or to a storage account. If you're using the script, it will all be deployed by itself. And to use Bastion to connect to a VM, just select the VM, just click on the Connect tab. You can see your RDP SSH, but you also have the Bastion. You just simply click on Use Bastion. You click in the username and the password, you click Connect, and another tab will open and you can do all your stuff. But to keep track of time, I'll need to go to our last habit, I think. So for our last habit, we want to look into how you can secure cloud identities and how you can foresee a good cloud identity and management strategy. So an important question we can ask ourselves is why securing our Azure identities that important these days? Well, because like you can see on the slide, these days are all kind of threats and cyber attacks where attackers may use existing techniques like social engineering, where an attacker tries to manipulate someone to give up confidential information, or ransomware, a kind of malware which encrypts a company's file or data, after which an attacker then demands a ransom to the company to restore access to the data. But there are also a lot of new technique attackers or hackers like to use, like acquiring Azure tenant keys from GitHub, or where an attacker tries to get into an Azure VM by use of a brute force or the PSSH password spray attack. And for example, when you're running an unprotected EAS web server in Azure and that server is breached, attackers can use it to install crypto mining software and use that for cryptocurrency mining. And you definitely don't want that. On this slide, you can see some examples of identity breaches. For example, a list of the top 20 most used passwords used by employees, which can be simply looked up by opening a browser and look for them on Bing or Google. A nice website on this slide, and the one we also use a lot is haveibeenfound.com. Where you can check if you have an account that has been compromised in a data breach. You simply need to type in an email address you want to validate, and then the site in the back checks if that specific account is breached. So definitely try that one out, but don't be surprised. You probably will have an account that is breached. So I would say check it out. And if Karel and myself can give one important tip is, as a company, you should always try to adapt the zero trust approach, where you assume breach and verify each request if it originates from a public cloud or outside your firewall. And by applying zero trust, you never assume trust, but instead you continue to validate that trust. In this way, a trust is no longer assumed just based from a location inside of your organization's perimeter, but also from outside. And yeah, this because most of your users now also access apps and data from the internet, like, for example, your Azure workloads or any of your SaaS application. And to help you on your way, Microsoft also has created some really nice resources and tools that can help you with protecting your Azure identities. First of all, yeah, like probably everybody knows, and like Karel already mentioned, you have role-based access control, which can help you to control who can access, edit, modify, or delete Azure resources, and this based on the least privileged access model. You can also use Azure AD Privileged Identity Management, or PIM, which is a service that enables on-demand, just-in-time administrative access to your Microsoft Online services. At least you should have an Azure AD Premium P2 license or an EMS E5 license. Another tool you can use is Azure Conditional Access. For people who don't know, Conditional Access is an Azure Active Directory tool that you can use to manage and control access to your corporate resources if they're on-premises or running in Azure. But you should at least also have an Azure AD Premium P1 license, or I think, if I'm correct, a Microsoft 365 Business Premium license. And last but not least, and we hope that everybody is already doing it, you should enable MFA, which you can now enable for free. You can see managing identity security for your Azure environment can be a big task. Luckily, you can simply enable Azure AD security defaults to better protect your environment whenever you start using Azure, which already will protect your environment against a lot of identity-related attacks. I think by this, we're coming to the end of our session. But before closing off, we just want to give you some key takeaways. 5 things we think you should really remember about our session of today. First of all, now it's really time to modernize your workload. So when moving to Azure, try to think beyond EAS where possible, of course. Try to remain in control of your Azure environment by applying governance with Azure Policy, tags, enabling Azure Security Center, Azure Defender Off, use resource logs, and so on. Definitely keep an eye on your cloud spend because at the end of the month, someone still has to pay the Azure bill. And you should try to use all free built-in Azure services and tools like Karl mentioned Azure Advisor, Azure Service Health, also use Azure Cost Management, and this to better manage and protect your Azure environment. And last but not least, know that identity is the new security parameter and that you should really try to secure all your cloud identities. And by this, we're at the end of the session. So I don't know, Karl, are there any questions?
No.
I think if we still have some time, of course, because it's already past 8
I think it's time
over
for the
there.
next speaker.
Yeah, I think it's time for the next speaker.
Okay, everyone.
So if you have a question later on, you can always contact us through our Twitter handle or through LinkedIn. We're always happy to answer them or to help you.
Hey everyone, thanks Karl and Wim. It's a really nice and session, even though there are a lot of new tools. There was a request from one of our users. I think if you can share the slide because it was really nice, some important tools there. Yeah. So yeah, and hey guys, if you have any questions, so you can unmute and can ask, or even though you can reach out on Twitter or to email to us, so we can communicate your questions to Wim and
It's a lot of info. We hear it a lot. It's a lot. It's a fully packed session with a lot of recommendations and tools you can or should use in your environment. So we will definitely share the slides and then everybody can look at it at their own pace. And if they have a question later on with looking at them, feel free to contact us. We're here to help. So.
Yeah, I have one question about, but I'm not sure it's quite relevant or not. Yeah, for suppose if you have a hybrid cloud migration and any recommended tool for performing the search, like you have shown for Azure Graph, we can search the VMs. So is there any recommended tool for performing the search on on-prem VMs and the VMs on different cloud network like AWS or Google?
Yeah, that should be Azure Migrate. You can use Azure Migrate to assess your current on-premises environment, but also AWS or Google Cloud that you can very easily use, not only to assess, but also to migrate. So that's the tool that you need to use there.
And there are a lot of tools integrated inside Azure Migrate that can also help you with database migrations or even file server migration or whatever. It's all integrated these days, and Microsoft is really working on the tools so that you can almost migrate everything to Azure or even to Azure Stack ACI, for example. It's easy to use, so definitely use that one, and it's integrated in your Azure environment. So
yeah, okay, thanks. Yeah. Okay, guys, I think we have a next speaker. I'm pretty sure there. Line up.
Yes, I'm there.
Hey, Amrish. Thanks, Karl and Wim. Really nice session.
Thank you.
We'll connect again, maybe in personal.
Yeah, thank you, and good luck to the next speaker.
Yeah,
bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Hey, guys, we have a next speaker, Amrish. He is, let me share my screen. Oh, okay. So Amrish is going to talk on Azure ML and Kubernetes service and model deployment. He is a NASA citizen scientist, and he's also a tech lead TCS Data and Analytics Practice Leads in India. And he'll be discussing how we'll build the deployment on Azure using Azure ML and deploy it on Kubernetes. So over to you, Amrish.
Yes, thank you, Mohammed. So I'll just share my screen. So so this session will be, what will I do is that I will take a case study and I will show off how we will deploy a model in Azure ML, why Azure ML is required, and so forth. Okay, so let's start. So basically, if I oversimplify, you guys can see my screen, right?
Yep.
If I oversimplify the thing, complete oversimplification, it is machine learning, if I really want to put it in production, has three main things. This is what I believe is an oversimplification of the thing. Okay. So I just give a few moments of theory. So before we go and jump into this, I want to share two stories. One story is that I participate in a number of data science competitions, and these are run for around 2 months or so. So the problem with these data science competitions is that you do a lot of experiments, and these experiments involve a lot of hyperparameters. Many things would be there. So keeping track first of the data that you're using, so maybe it's fixed for you, and maybe you're using some external data in a competition. So that data also changes, and moreover, all these hyperparameters there, they make your life very cumbersome, and keeping track of it is really cumbersome without a proper machine learning platform. Okay, that is one story. So another story, so say suppose you are writing a research paper or something, you would conduct a lot of experiments, and the problem with the experiments is that your model also changes, your architecture also changes, and also these hyperparameters also changes. And because of these hyperparameters being changing, your metrics also changes. So there is a wide variety of things that you need to keep track. So the problem is that if you're doing it manually, it becomes very difficult for you to do all these things. So just a background, because we would be using Azure ML, and we will see of how this would simplify our task. Okay, so usually the steps for building a model is creating an Azure ML workspace. You are uploading the data into the Azure ML workspace. You create the compute cluster, you create the model, compute environment, estimator, and then you run and register the model. Don't worry, we'll go to the steps one by one. And we'll show a demo also. Unfortunately, I cannot run the demo live because it takes a lot of time. So what I have done is that I have run the demo beforehand, and the code will be in GitHub, so we can do it. So first is we create a workspace. Okay, so this is the workspace we are creating. So when you're creating a workspace, you give the name of the workspace, a subscription ID, the resource group, and you give the location. So what happens once you run this? I've already run this. What happens is that, let's see what happens.
Hi, Amrish. Sorry, I think we are just seeing your slide.
Oh my God. Oh, you're not seeing my screen. Okay.
Yeah.
You're seeing my screen now?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. So this is the thing. So when we are creating the workspace, what happens is that so the workspace is the house of everything. Okay. So I'll repeat once more. So when you create a workspace, you give the name, subscription ID, resource group, and the location. So once you run this, it is the house of everything. So once you run this, what happens is that Within the resource group, you have this workspace, you have the application insights being created, you have the key vault and the storage account being created. Just don't worry about at this point the AKS cluster and the container registry. We'll come to it because I've run it. This is already there. So this is a workspace. So let's go into the workspace, what it's actually there. So it's like the house for my whole of the things. So I'm in the Azure ML workspace. I go into here. We have not yet run any models or so. Okay. So here in the workspace, because it is the house, it has got, if you see, you've got notebooks, you've got an automated ML space. The designer is also there. We are not going to use the designer in this session. You've got data sets, experiments, pipelines, models, endpoints. You have the computes all over the place. So this is a house. Okay. So we have just created the house. Okay. Now what we do is that we are trying to do, so before I go into it, what we are going to do is that we are going to model to predict the quality of red wine. Okay. So what we do is that the data that is there, we would actually upload the data into the Azure workspace. So I'll just show you the data. Let me just, okay, show you the data. So the data is here. This is wine quality red data. Okay. So what we are going to do is that given these features out here, we are going to predict the quality of the red wine. Okay. So these are the features. So this is my data set. It is in my local machine. And what I do is that I upload it to my default data store in the workspace. So I have run it already because the whole thing takes a lot of time, and within 1 hour you guys will get impatient. So I have run this, and what happens is that if I go down here into my workspace out here, this is a data store which is already here. So it has a default data store. If I go to this blob store out here, see the account name. So these are the containers. So I've not done anything fancy. I just use this and it gets and uploads into this Azure ML wine data. So this is what is being uploaded out here. So this line of code out here, I have uploaded my data. So why I need the data? Because I'm going to create a model. Okay. So then this is just creating a training folder of no use, not much use. This is a very important thing, compute cluster. Why? Because if you are with me, for a model to run, you require data and you require compute. So I am creating the compute here. So these are the configurable things that you can use, very much configurable. And this you can do one time. So this, I'm just using a standard D2V2. You are free to use any good configuration. So I'm just creating a compute cluster. Okay. Next, what I do is, this is my training script. This is my actual model. I have not done very fancy modeling here. The intention is not to do fancy modeling, is to show the power of, what should I say, the power of Azure ML. So I've just made a decision tree regressor and cross-validation. So if you're familiar, this is a very standard thing. And I've added some arguments here, the data folder and the max depth, which is an hyperparameter. And I read the wine data. I do the decision tree regressor, and then I do a cross-validation. And here's the thing. The thing is that now what the max depth which is coming in, I can just log it here with my run context, and I can also log the error, the RMSC here, and that's a training script. So I have not yet run the model. It is just I have created the script. It's just writing code in your VS Code or something. I've just done that. Next, what I do, and this is very interesting, I create the environment. So what is an environment? An environment is something like you have got the data, you've got the workspace, you've got the compute, you've got the code, but environment is something like the libraries that you require. So this program out here requires two libraries, the scikit-learn and the pandas. So this is what is the pandas and the scikit-learn library, which is a very popular library. So I'm using that and I'm creating this environment. Then you register the environment in the workspace. Okay. Now, if I go back to here, I can see once I register, you can see the environments also here. So what it does is just it actually create. Oh, this is my environment. Sorry, these are the other environments. This is my environment, and I have created it. You see, it's created by Ambarish Ganguly. And if you see here, this also has the Azure ML defaults, scikit-learn, and pandas. So this is what it is. The environment is there. Now I create the estimator. So what is the estimator? Estimator is something which binds everything together. So I've got the training script. I've got the script parameters. So here's the maximum depth, which is in the what should I say, in the model, one of the hyperparameters. And this is a data folder, which is the place where I have put the data. I've got the compute target. I have the registered environment, which is the environment, and also the model training. So this is the estimator, which is there. So this is binding everything together. And ultimately, what I do is that I create an experiment, and then I submit the experiment with the estimator. So I am now pushing it for training. Now I'll show you something very interesting. Unknowingly, what happened was that before I was going for the demo, so what happened was that, so this is an experiment. So this I have submitted one experiment, but you see I've got 3 runs. So what happened was, let me show you the runs. So 2 of my runs failed. So that's unknowingly, it's a good thing for a demo, because it shows that in one experiment, I can have many runs. And what happened was that I had installed a new Azure ML library, Azure ML. So that did not have default things. So you see, when it failed in the run, it showed me no module named pandas. So this was the thing that it was giving me, that what was failing. So what I did was that, it's good for a demo to see. So what I did, I went to so it's a problem of the environment. So I went back and added this. So in my previous code that I had written, this Azure ML default environment had some pandas inbuilt, but this new Azure ML environment did not have. So I had to add pandas. So it took me twice to figure out. I was first having some heartbeat problem, that just at the time of the demo, this is happening. So I ran it twice, and then I figured, okay, it was a pandas problem. So once I added it, so it is a run. So you see one experiment having multiple runs. And once you go out here, you see the problem that I was mentioning, that you have an environment here. You have also the metrics here. So you see 8 and 0.779. So this is a metrics here. So what you can do here is that you can run more than once. So maybe we can try it. So here, when you submit it, so this is one hyperparameter. Where is hyper? So the max depth is the depth of the tree. So what I can do is that while we are while we are in the conversation, maybe this I can change it to 10 and maybe run it again. And then once it is running, we'll come back and see. So this is, I am changing it here and it's the same experiment. So, and then I run it again. And I just want to show you this demo, the live thing, which is going on. Yes, see here, I've just submitted one. The script 4 is running. So it's preparing. So it goes through a lot of stages here and then it would go. It will take some time, but while it is doing, let's progress further. So till this point, we have registered the model. We have already registered the model here. So what does registering the model mean? Is that if you go to the workspace out here, so as you do models, right, I was saying that keeping track of the models is actually very difficult. Here you can keep track of the model. So this is Wine model and this is experiment and I have registered this model and I can give tags to this model also. And I have a run ID associated with it. So you see it is tagged with run 3. Run 4 is going on. So the model is associated with run 3 and I have a traceability. So the model lineage, if I may say, I have not encountered this term. I'm just made up this term. So the whole dependencies is all tracked here. Metrics, images, child runs, outputs and logs. It's very important when you're debugging things and something's going wrong. You can see the logs here. So all this is here. See, model 4 is going on, but my model, which is registered, is with with run 3. Okay. So this model is done. So what we will do is that now say suppose you are a data scientist, you have you have built the model, but now you give it to someone who would really deploy the infer the model and deploy the model. So the inference script is basically now you will use the model to do all the different kinds of predictions. So this model was predicting this part, right? So the model is built with all the data. Okay. Now what we do is the inference script. Inference script is actually very easy. It is I'm getting the model, the Wine model from the model registry, and then I'm predicting the model. And then I'm passing it as a list. So it has got an init and a run data. And you see how I'm using it from the registered model. Similarly, here also I would require the dependencies for the inference script. And I would require an inference configuration, which would bind the code which is there and the training file and the environment. So all it is binding it here, the inference configuration. And then what I would do is that I would create an inference cluster. So you had a compute cluster for building the model and you require an inference cluster. So the inference cluster is here. If you go to compute here, I had the compute cluster, which was my CPU cluster standard D2V2. The inference cluster is what I did is that I made a Kubernetes service. So if you see here, it is a Kubernetes service. I made it cluster purpose dev post, and it will create a Kubernetes cluster for me. Why? Because now it's, say suppose you have built not a very simple model like me, but a very, very good model like a credit scoring model or something really business important for the business, and everybody is trying to use your model. So what you do is that you want to deploy it in a very scalable cloud native environment, and then that is why you would use a Kubernetes cluster. And obviously, since this takes a lot of time, what I did was that I did it before. And what it would do is that if I go here to the AKS cluster here, so it created it, and if I go here, the cluster, so the cluster is out here. You can see that. So this is the cluster out here, and it is being created. It has got service also. The wine service. So we'll come to this, how we got this wine service. So once we create this cluster, so this is a deployment configuration. We'll deploy an AKS web service with one CPU core and 1 GB, and we'll deploy the model to the inference cluster. So this is how we are deploying the model to the inference cluster. So here we have the workspace. We are naming it as a wine service. We have the model which we have got from here, the model that we have registered. We have registered in the workspace. We have got a inference config, which is the config that we have used. So this is the inference config we have got, and we have also got a deployment config. So what are the web service configuration, and the deployment target is the production cluster. This is the AKS cluster that is there. So this takes a lot of time. So fortunately we have done it, and the wine service is already deployed. So I can see it here. Okay, we'll see this. Good thing it has run. So the cluster is here, and I can see the cluster out here. So what happens is that after the cluster is done, we'll perform the predictions with the inference cluster. So this is a endpoint. So this endpoint should match with the endpoint out here. Should match with the endpoint here. So this is the endpoint that we are having. And so this is some authentication that we are doing. We are getting the primary key and the secondary key, and we are getting the primary key, and I'm using this. So this part, so once it is all deployed, this part I've done it in a Jupyter notebook. You can use it in any client. You can use it in your React.js, any UI, Streamlit UI, or any UI you can do it. You only need this person, this endpoint. You require this endpoint. You require the primary key and the secondary key, and then you pass in a JSON, and this is the data that we are passing in. So this data is this data out here. So I made up some values which is not here. Some values of this fixed acidity, volatile, all these other things. So I made up these values out here, and then it is being called with a request.post, and the quality is 7. So this ends the whole thing. So in summary, what we did was that in my overly simplified thing, as I call it, so these 3 blocks, the model train, model inference, and the model deployment. So lots of steps in between, but if you think of it, it is 3 things, 3 blocks, and the train is pushing the model into the registry, and I'm using the model to infer, and then I'm deploying the model. But the good thing is that it's all controlled in one environment. You have total control of the thing. And for people like a data scientist who does thousands and thousands of experiments, it's very easy to keep track of the thing. So this is a great tool, and so people would find it very easy to use it. And just for our sake, let's go back and see the model has been deployed. So we did that thing, right? We did one experiment with the run. So this is my latest run. So if I see my latest run here, it has been completed, and you can see the metrics here. So the max depth is 10, and the RMSE is 0.837. So if you go back, you can see 3, 8, RMSE 0.779. So very nice, right? It helps to track, and I am not concerned about all these keeping track in a separate Excel and all these kind of things. So more or less, this is the thing. So I'll just see whether there are any questions. Okay. Not much questions out here. So okay. So this ends more or less my thing. So if you have any questions, I would be glad to receive any questions on this. And this is a whole Azure ML workspace. So that's about it.
Thank you, Ambrish. Hey guys, if you have any questions, you can ask to Ambrish, and you can unmute and can ask. Ambrish, I have one question here.
Yes.
Basically, how you decide the the size of the Kubernetes cluster for your based on your ML model or data?
It depends on your workload. So that's what you would. So your Kubernetes cluster would be the nodes that you will decide is based on your load actually.
Okay,
So
suppose if we have the data which we have to train or model the data, like 2 GB data or 3 GB data.
Okay.
So, like based on that, how you decide the configuration size and
Okay. So that's a great question. So that's on the training side, right? So the training side, when you train the data, this is a compute cluster that you're having. Let me. Oh, I have not shared. So let me share my screen. So the compute cluster which you are having for training, that will depend on the size of your data. So maybe if you are training like a huge data set, you would like to have a very large machine. So that's the thing. And especially if you're training with images, text data, unstructured data, it is preferable that you use GPU. So you will have a GPU machine for training. So for training, you would require a lot of resources. But once you train it, after you train it, as you see, is that you would create a model. So that model is being saved. So after that, if you are just using it for a few users, Kubernetes cluster may be an overkill kind of a thing. You can use a container instance, very easy kind of thing. You won't actually do it in production maybe, but if you're using for a lots of users, you can do that model itself is when it is being predicting, should take a few seconds to run, but your training time is huge. Your memory and all your power, horsepower, is required during the training and not during the meaning prediction.
Thanks. Is there any standard, means like from Microsoft, or means like for this kind of this much GB of the data or this kind of data, we should make the configuration of this kind of cluster, or 1 GPU, 2 GPU, or maybe one node?
I do not know. Maybe there might be, but as such, you will when you are training the data as a modeler, it would be very natural for you that meaning you would require more RAM. But obviously, one thing is that there are several techniques in which you have, say, suppose limited GPU. You can tune your parameters so that you can use it. Maybe, for example, I'll give a very simple example. So I use a lot of Kaggle resources which are actually limited. So they have limited GPU. So if you have a huge batch to train, so what happens in training is that you divide into batches when you are doing a very large data set. So you divide into batches. So if you have a very large data set, then you would require more compute power. So rather than that, you break it up into small batches, and that way it can fit into memory and you can train in that manner. So that's the thing. But to your question, I do not know of anything which is standard thing, but most people would be using very high configuration machines for training unstructured data. Structured data, I think yours anything 16 GB RAM should be fine.
Okay, thank you so much. Hey guys, if you have any further questions, so you can ask, or you can email to me, or maybe you can reach out on Twitter. So yeah, that's for today. Thank you so much. We have an upcoming session on Kubernetes by Nilesh, I think on 19th August. So if you are interested, please go and you can register on our meetupgroup.com. So this session is going to be like how to monitor Kubernetes cluster using open source tools such as Prometheus and Grafana. So that's by Nilesh, and Nilesh is a Microsoft MVP, and he's a big data cloud solution architect at Prudential. So thank you for joining today, and hope you have a good evening.
Is one thing that I just want to say is that let me just share my screen, if I may. So I have started a new channel. If you guys are interested on this type of channel, so there is one playlist which I have made specifically, is that intro to deep learning, Docker, Kubernetes, ACI, and AKS. So what it does is that it will take you through a deep learning full course from Kaggle Learn, and then you can deploy it into ACI and Kubernetes. So if you're interested, please do check out, and I'll be posting more on this channel, a lot of things. So thanks for letting me self promote here.
Oh, thank you so much. Anything is with the community is good. Yeah, thank you.
Yes, I'll copy paste the link here.
Thank you so much.
Yes.
Okay, see you everyone next session on 19th August. Yeah. Have a good evening.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.